It was my husband's request that I meet with 5 black men for this. A story of actual adultery. I was shocked to hear my husband say, "I want you to do it with them over dinner." I never imagined our marriage would reach to this point. As I set down my fork and stared at the man whose words reverberated in my thoughts, I felt my heart pound and my palms quiver. I had placed my trust in this man. I wanted to think it was all in good fun, but his expression and the rhythm of his tapping on the table made it clear it was no joke, and it was only the beginning. For 10 years, I felt my marriage was rock solid, based on love, trust, and unwavering loyalty, or at least that's what I told my spouse. Daniel was the type of man who everyone respected. He was a provider and a gentle soul. He always made sure I had everything I needed, from extravagant gifts to unexpected vacations. But love isn't about material things. It's about feeling safe, cherished, and valued. Lately, though, something had changed. It began with the little things, like longer nights at work, distracted conversations, and a chilliness in his touch. I tried to ignore it, but I would lie awake at night wondering what had changed between us. I convinced myself that it was just stress, but I could feel it. One evening, he invited me to dinner at our favorite restaurant, a warm and inviting place where we used to laugh and talk for hours. I had hoped that this was his way of making things right between us, but now it seems like he has moved on. Crossing over. Widening gap, but I could tell right once that something was off as I took a seat across from Daniel. His countenance was unreadable, his fingers softly tapped on the table, and he added, "I want you to do it with them," as if he were inquiring about the weather. At first, I was confused and had trouble processing what I had heard. I lowered my voice to a whisper, my stomach knotted up, and his lips formed the most delicate grin. "I beg you to sleep with them. Their number is 5. Something spooky happened to me." As my breath became shallow, I blinked, hoping I had misinterpreted Daniel and that this was not funny. However, he was simply sitting there, staring at me. Under the table, my fists clenched. I wondered why you would say something so offensive. I almost choked on my own words as I forced out my trembling voice, but he inclined his head slightly as if he were considering his response. "I need to know," so he eventually responded, "Know what?" His jaw clenched and his fingers gripped the table edge just a little too tightly. He was testing me. I had no idea why. My world, my marriage, and everything I thought I knew were starting to crumble. If only I had noticed the warning signs sooner, I would have been able to breathe easier. The air around us became heavy and suffocating. A dark pit formed in my stomach, pulling me under. This had nothing to do with love or trust. As I sat across from the man I believed I knew, the man I had loved for a decade, the restaurant had become silent, but for the soft clink of cutlery. My chest felt tight and my throat parched. In the midst of whispered conversations and gentle jazz music, Daniel's words loomed heavy. "Yes," he repeated, his voice controlled and unsettling. I clenched my jaw and dug my fingers into my lap, refusing to engage in what seemed like a game with him. His lips curled into a smirk, but there was no amusement in his eyes. I swallowed hard, unable to think clearly, my heart pounding in my ears. "Daniel, it seems like you're testing me, and for what seems like some sort of twisted fantasy or insecurity." Your gaze never wavered. "I've always sensed that you had secrets, something you tried to hide. Now I simply want to see if you'll admit it." I felt the blood draining from my face. Inside me, I couldn't understand what you were talking. I looked at him in disbelief as he leaned back in his chair and laughed. I clenched my jaw, my body quivering with a mix of anger and fear. I was wondering if he wanted me to answer yes so he could use it against me, or if he simply wanted an excuse to leave. Just as his smirk began to fade, I noticed an unreadable flicker in his eyes. That's when I realized this had nothing to do with me. I whispered under my breath as his expression darkened. "Clearly, you want me to do this because you already have his heart." His fingers tapped slowly on the table, and his smirk returned, but it failed to reach his eyes. If I had my heart in my chest, I would never have asked him to. Twisted, my hands were clenched into fists as I felt the floor crumble beneath me. "You've been unfaithful, and now you expect me to humiliate myself by bringing me down to your level, so we're on equal ground." "Oh my God," I breathed, but he mumbled something about not being dramatic. I cannot believe this was happening. I have never been unfaithful to you. The term liar hit me like a slap, and his eyes were fixed on mine as sharp as glass. I want you to tell me the truth. Have you considered this? Have you fantasized it? My voice cracked as I snarled, I've given you everything, and you still haven't given it a second thought. Never once did he interrupt me when I was unwell. You repulse me. His smirking returned. That was not a response. With my legs dragging behind me, I tried to stand up and leave, but just as I was about to, his hand suddenly firmly grasped my wrist. The command, sit down, sent shivers down my spine, and the tension in the room was palpable. I yanked my wrist back into my chair, yelling, "You're terrifying me." He then tilted his head, and tears welled up in my eyes, but I fought back. I could ask you the same thing, but his expression turned gloomy. I gulped and tried to maintain my voice calm, but he chuckled. I don't want an escape. I want the truth. You don't deserve it. He stared at me intently. With his fingers constantly drumming against the table, he confirms what you already knew. That's the final answer. I softly murmured something, and for the first time that night, I saw genuine pain in his face. It was fleeting, though, and I quickly regained my composure. We're done here, he said, pushing back his chair. I held my breath, trying to decipher his meaning. He stood up straight, straightening his suit jacket. My dear wife, I have everything I need. A shiver ran up my spine as I wondered what was wrong, and then I felt his warm breath brush against my ear, confirming my worst fears. Daniel said, "See you at home," and then he walked away, leaving me more terrified than I had ever been before. I couldn't understand what he meant, and that was the worst part. I wished I'd seen the warning signs earlier. The drive home was quiet, but my mind was racing as I tried to make sense of what had happened. Daniel's remarks lingered with me. What did he mean by that? What was his plan? I need confirmation. I drove into our driveway, my hold on the wheel growing stronger, and there stood the house. Still gloomy and unwelcoming, the house we had built our lives in felt strange, like a trap, as I waited for spring to arrive. I was hesitant to get out of the car because my body begged me to turn around and never return, but where would I go? This was my home, or at least it had been, so I took a deep breath. Then I managed to unlock. As I entered through the front entrance, the air felt heavy and stuffy, as if the walls were holding their breath. I cautiously made my way into the house, my footsteps echoing on the hardwood floor. The kitchen light was on, casting an eerie glow throughout the room. My eyes darted around, but nothing caught my attention. Then I noticed a wine glass with a red liquid swirling inside. Next to it, I saw a note. My palms quavered as I fumbled for the small piece of folded paper. My breath caught as I read the words written in Daniel's neat, controlled handwriting. Upstairs, in the bedroom, my heart raced. With careful, measured steps, I had to go even if my gut urged me not to. Ascending the staircase sent shivers down my spine as I felt the creak beneath my feet. The hallway stretched out before me like a dark tunnel with no end in sight. Finally, I arrived at our bedroom door and hesitated, my fingers lingering on the handle. I could sense something waiting on the other side, so I pushed it open, but then I came to a complete stop. James sat on the window seat. Standing at the foot of our bed were 5 tall, broad strangers. I felt my body shiver, and my voice rise to a whisper as I waited for Daniel to answer, taking a slow sip of his whiskey first. You never answered my question, so I figured I'd give you a choice. His suit jacket was gone and his tie was loose. He appeared too relaxed, but I hardly noticed him. His piercing eyes met mine, and he leaned closer, his knees bent, as my stomach churned uncontrollably. What on earth are you talking about? Filled with something I could not name, do it right now in front of me, or he paused, letting the silence suffocate me, or what I managed to choke out, he smirked, or we are done. The room spun, my pulse pounded in my ears. You are insane. Am I? He raised a brow. I am giving you exactly what you want. I never wanted this, I screamed, my voice cracking. He exhaled, shaking his head, as if he were disappointed. I do not believe you. I turned to the men, my chest rising, and falling in ragged breaths they stood there. Unmoving, watching, not a single one spoke. Get out, my voice wavered, but I forced strength into it. No one moved. I said, get out, I screamed, still nothing. Daniel sighed, dramatically standing up. They do not move unless I tell them to. My head snapped back to him. What the hell is wrong? With you, his face hardened. What is wrong with me? No, the real question is what is wrong with you? You walk around pretending to be the perfect wife, but I see right through you. I know the thoughts in your head, the desires. You try to hide. Tears blurred my vision. You do not know anything about me, do I not? He took a step closer then, and prove it, walk out that door, and never look back. But if you hesitate, his smirk returned. Then I was right about you all along. I felt like I was suffocating. You are sick. I spat, my voice thick with disgust. He just smiled, and that was when I knew he had never loved me. Not really. I had spent 10 years devoted to a man who only saw me as an object, something to control, to test, to break, and I was done. I turned on my heel and ran down the stairs. Through the hall, my vision blurred, but I did not stop. I could hear Daniel's laughter, the icy, belittling echo behind me says, "You're messed up, honey." With a gasp for breath, I slammed the front door behind me. My body trembled fiercely as adrenaline surged through my veins. Yet, I could care less about the cold night air because I had already made up my mind and would never turn back. Samantha did not try to force me. Instead, she held me close while she stroked my back in soothing circles as I sobbed uncontrollably and trembled violently. I had no idea how much I had been suppressing until now, how much fear, betrayal, and devastation had been building inside me. Subtly assuring me that you are safe, she continued to say, but I couldn't help but wonder if I was truly safe the second Daniel's name entered my thoughts. Samantha must have sensed my body tensing up because she cautiously drew away, surveying me with concern. "Come on, let's get you in the car," she said. I followed her lead, my legs still weak and my breath trembling, because I had no clue what he was capable of. I felt a peculiar type of fatigue wash over me as soon as I took my place in the passenger seat. It was as if my body was turning off after a run on adrenaline. Before starting the car, Samantha turned to me and asked, "What happened?" I forced myself to swallow, my throat raw, and my mind begged me not to speak, but I felt like it was already happening, so I spilled the beans, the dinner, the accusations, the 5 men in my bedroom, and the ultimatum he issued. I felt a wave of panic wash over me as I wiped my face and steadied my shaking hands. Samantha's expression changed from shock to horror to pure wrath as she listened. When I finished speaking, her grip on the wheel became so tight that her knuckles turned white. She muttered something under her breath. I was paralyzed with fear of Daniel's retaliation when I thought about going to the police, but I mustered up the courage to ask them the truth anyway. My husband had 5 men sleep with me in our bedroom, and he had been playing a sick, twisted game with my life to see how loyal I would be. He didn't do anything wrong. I fled before anything occurred. Now he'll simply deny it, distort everything to make me look crazy, and Samantha's jaw clenched. After a lengthy period of silence, Samantha eventually spoke out, saying, "Then we find another way." Daniel was powerful, methodical, and had been plotting this for a long time. What if he comes out after me? I wanted to believe that, but I needed her to tell me otherwise. Her lips were pursed into a thin line as she asked, "What do you mean?" We build a case. We find proof that he has probably done something similar before, and he isn't as untouchable as he thinks. I mumbled something, and Samantha's face darkened. She agreed to give it a go, and we were soon on our way. The tension between us was palpable, but I also felt a glimmer of hope. Finally, after this nightmare had begun, I would not be alone. That night, I hardly slept, and Samantha made me tea and clothes, but nothing had helped calm the storm inside me. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, my mind replaying every word and glance. When daylight finally arrived, I felt numb because I disregarded a warning sign. Samantha cautiously entered the room after a gentle knock. I brewed coffee, sat up slowly, and felt a twinge of strain in my muscles. With a steaming mug in hand, she sat down next to me. She hesitated before starting, saying, "I checked your phone while you were sleeping." My body tensed up, and her eyes locked with mine. "Daniel has been contacting you frequently." I felt a chill go up my spine as I wondered what he wanted to say. Despite my fear, I inquired about the contents of his voicemails and texts. Some sounded normal, apologetic, for example, but others, in which my voice barely escaped, were more intense. She sighed and reached for my phone, but I was hesitant to answer. With my heart racing, I hit play on the first voicemail, my fingers teetering over the button. You're being overly dramatic, honey. Get back home so we can discuss this second message. All right, I get it. You're attempting to punish me. It's cute, but you really should go home now. This is the third time we've tried this. My fourth message was a confirmation that my suspicions about you were correct. You're a coward and a liar. I'll make sure you're sorry if this is your desire. You have no clue who you're dealing with. I just hung up the phone. I'm shivering with fear. We are not going to sit around and see what he does next. Samantha seized it, her expression becoming more serious, and we are going to the police. I was about to object, but she shook her head in disapproval. With a slow nod, my chest-tense Daniel posed a serious threat. He was actively seeking me out. The station exuded an air of cold sterility, making you feel out of place no matter how justified your presence was. A young officer, with a neutral and professional expression, took my statement. However, when I opened up about the 5 men in my bedroom and how Daniel had tested me, I could see a flicker of doubt in his eyes. The officer asked, "Did Daniel physically harm you?" I answered no, but I did ask if the men touched me, and he looked down at his notepad as he exhaled slowly. "Miss, I know how terrible this is for you, but at the moment, there are only threats and a marital argument. What we can do, other from getting a temporary restraining order, is wait for him to do anything, because Samantha snapped and asked, 'Did you even listen to what she just said?' I did, and I think she's afraid. The cop said, 'My advice is that you find a secure place to stay, alter your daily habits, and give us a call if he gets in touch with you again.' Right away, the only thing they could do was make me feel like I was about to get sick. An additional victory had been achieved by Daniel. Samantha was the first to burst out, saying something under her breath, but I was paralyzed with fear. I gave out a hollow laugh as my body weighed down by tiredness and sorrow. As we returned to the car, she warned that this wasn't the end. "Now that we're fighting, we'll find a way." Internally, I felt nothing as I nodded. I had an uneasy feeling that Daniel was not finished with me, and I knew he was still out there. I felt like a ghost as I sat outside Samantha's apartment window and stared out at the city below. People were smiling and working and going about their lives, but I couldn't get away from him. I was frightened that Daniel was still out there, watching and waiting. I clenched my fists around my coffee cup, my hands shaking with anxiety, as I tried to make sense of everything that had transpired. How had my life transformed from that of a faithful wife to that of a runaway fugitive, evading the man I had entrusted with my life? Samantha, who had been restlessly checking her phone ever since we left the police station, sat across from me, her expression unreadable. "You need to eat something," she whispered. I shook my head, refusing to believe her. "You have to take care of yourself," she added. I emitted a hollow laugh as I wished her well. It seems like a sandwich won't be enough to mend the twisted way my husband just attempted to break me. Breath out while massaging her forehead, I felt a tightening in my chest as I swallowed hard. The question hung heavy in the air, pressing down on my chest. I confessed, I don't know what else I could do. The police had already dismissed my fears, and now Samantha was speaking. I could sense the hesitation in Samantha's voice. She seemed to know exactly what I was going to say before I even spoke it, and then I whispered it. Daniel, with his wealth, power, and influence, was extremely careful and would never make a mistake big enough to get caught. Taking the restraining order wouldn't stop him, though. There was no response to her question, so I ran away for the remainder of my life, changed my name, and hid it forever. I felt like Daniel had already stolen a lot from me. My faith, security, and identity were all jeopardized if I fled at this moment. By doing so, I would be surrendering my entire being to him and allowing him to triumph. I knew there had to be an alternative. My thoughts raced to the messages he had sent me, which he had accurately described as, "You are a coward, and you have no idea who you are dealing with." The messages were both threats and insights into his thoughts. I had just snatched power away from Daniel, control, which he desperately sought, by walking out, defying him, and using that unexpected turn of events as leverage. Sam is in an effort to get you to react the way he wants you to, get close so he can control you again, I asked, all of a sudden, in a voice that was calmer than it had been in days. She blinked, and I continued, "What if I stop fighting? What if I stop running? What if I face him head-on?" Her face turned pale. Are you insane? Might it be that I already confessed? If so, might I perhaps draw on it? Samantha took a seat. The woman crossed her arms, saying, "Okay, I'm listening." She took a long breath and forced herself to think wisely, knowing that the cops would not assist her. I know Sam is usually very careful and never does anything without a plan, but he messed up and sent me threats, revealing his true self. If I can convince him to go even further and say something incriminating, it would prove that he is dangerous, but the legal system won't protect me. Her eyes widened in shock as she realized you wanted to bait him. I nodded, realizing that waiting for him to act is just as perilous as baiting him. She rubbed her temples and let out a quick exhale. All right, so what if you succeed in getting him to admit something? I make sure he can't hide or cover this up by going public with it. I strip him of his power. After staring at me for what seemed like an eternity, Samantha finally nodded. If we do this, we do it carefully, we do it smart, no rushing in, no emotional outbursts. We plan this like a war. I spoke with a steady voice, and for the first time in weeks, I didn't feel like I was losing. I felt like I was ready to fight. I'm uncertain about what will happen next. Daniel may see through me, anticipate my moves, be even more dangerous than I imagined, or maybe I will win. He lied to me for 10 years, and I loved him nevertheless. For a decade, I was taught to believe that I was safe from control, manipulation, and testing. It turns out I was mistaken, but I will never again be so naive. This experience taught me that monsters aren't always lurking in the shadows. Sometimes they sit across from you at dinner, kiss you goodnight, and say, "I love you," without meaning it. The worst part is that sometimes you don't even notice it coming. I'm seeing him now, and he won't see me coming. Leave a comment telling me what you would do if the person you loved became your worst enemy. Remember that the most dangerous people can be those with the brightest smiles. If you enjoyed this real story and want to see more like it, subscribe and hit the bell. This is just the beginning.